What's this video? The History of Tier 0 Decks Part 1 TCG?
Over the course of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, many decks have risen and fallen, leaving their impact on the meta and by extension the wider player base in various ways. Over time, there is one additional tier above all of these, the extremely rare situation where a deck takes over 65% of top cut representation.
Look, it's my video right here. The top 5 Tier 0 decks in history of Yu-Gi-Oh! I remember when I made this video, I originally had it on my list of videos not to make. But then I ended up making it because I watched other videos on the subject and they were all terrible. It was obvious they didn't do any research. And I was like, oh my god, I have no idea how there is like not a good video on this subject on the internet. Why do Yu-Gi-Oh players refuse to write down?
This classification, known as Tier 0, has only been given to a select few decks over the course of the game's history, generally representing a format where there is...
Yeah, fine, I'll do it myself, is literally how the Tier 0 video was made, and also why the banlist series exists, because no one else had done it. And I didn't want to, but I needed the research. It was actually someone else who discovered that Necroz was Tier 0. I did look into it, but I couldn't find any tournaments in which they had, 65% representation. And then there was another YouTuber who watched my video and then did the research on Necroz, and they found a tournament in which Necroz hit the required amount for Tier 0. That's why they are now considered Tier 0. But they only did the research after I did my video, and they're like, wait, how come you left off Necroz? And I said, oh, it's because Necroz wasn't Tier 0. So they dug through tournament results and they found one. Good job, Logs. Hey, I'm not even mad.
In the first couple of years of the game, Yu-Gi-Oh did...
Thanks for doing the research, because I couldn't find it, because Yu-Gi-Oh players don't write down.
Though not nearly oppressive enough to be considered Tier 0, as multiple other decks did have footing in the meta. This was all about to change with the set widely regarded as the largest step...
The background didn't repeat seamlessly.
Footing in the meta. This was all about to change with the set widely regarded as the largest. However, as powerful as BLS was, its counterpart in the set was arguably just as strong, if not more. Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End had the same stat line and summoning condition as BLS.
Oh my god, thanks for the
However, his effect was much more of a blanket nuke.
This card, I feel like people don't talk about this card enough, even though it is talked about to death. Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End reads like a broken-ass custom card that was printed in early Yu-Gi-Oh, where we don't have cards that's broken even in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh. People say we have like really overtuned cards nowadays, and we have super long card text nowadays, but like back then we had cards like Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End, which was a full board wipe and hand wipe, and did damage to your opponent, and had good stats, and had an easy ass summoning requirement. It was like, what the hell? It has premium stats at 3000 attack, 2500 defense. Its summoning requirement is only one light and dark monster in the graveyard. It has no restriction. You could just come out and be a big beatstick, which in its time would have been good. If this was a vanilla monster with no other effects besides a summoning condition, it would be amazing. On top of that, it was also a full board wipe and a hand wipe. There are no full hand wipes. There just weren't any. And it did that on top of a board wipe. And also did damage on top of it. Inflict 300 damage to your opponent's life points for each card that is sent to the graveyard by this event. Like, why? Why does it do everything? And then some. Now, one card is considered good. There's a full hand wipe, full board wipe, easy summon requirements, premium stat line. This card is ridiculous, and it came out like in, 2004? This is the pinnacle of, overpoweredness. If anything, when I was making the Power, 9 video for Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pre-Errata Chaos Emperor Dragon is definitely on that list. There are full hand wipes. What about Tiara?
And hands.
Tiara is not as easy to summon as this card. This card is piss easy to summon. Chaos Dragon Levianeer is harder to summon than Chaos Emperor Dragon.
While it might seem like it's highly interruptible, at the time the rule known as priority was in effect, meaning that the player who summoned CED had the option to trigger its effect before a card could respond to a successful summon, like Bottomless Trap Hole or Ring of Destruction. This meant that unless you could stop the summon itself with a card like Solemn Judgment, the game state was bound to get nuked. This could be turned into an instant win as well, simply by controlling...
Holy I forgot about priority. You're right. You could just wipe the whole field and there's nothing they could do about it because nobody played Solemn Judgment back then. Oh my god, it's even more broken. Basically just add quick effect to it, and that's how the old score worked.
did not have a special summon condition like the other three, requiring to either be tribute summoned or cheated out in some way. However, he made up for it by cycling a use spell on summon, which essentially gave you an additional use.
Dark Magician of Chaos was so good. This card was used in all kinds of combo decks back in the day, where basically they'd mill their deck full of cards, then they would cheat out Magician of Chaos in order to get back one of their power staples, like Metamorphosis, for example, because this card was also level 8, and they would tribute Metamorphosis to go into Cyber Twin Dragon and just like attack twice with limited removal and just win. It was like one of the first combo decks. It was one of the first decks that like actually took use of like Card Trooper. It was actually this deck that made Card Trooper get like limited to 1 because it was like a modern tier limit combo deck.
Use of one of the best cards in your deck thanks to the power level of the spells in this era.
This card was
a common way to use Demock's effect was to put him into the graveyard.
The Historian Law, I know everything about Yu-Gi-Oh! Nobody knows more about Yu-Gi-Oh! Than I do. I'm a genius.
Hadn't done enough to slow the deck down for others to compete. That step would be taken in August of 2004, around 5 months after the introduction of the Chaos Core, being the first ever forbidden and limited list in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. With this list, cards that had been staple in the game since their inception were removed.
Oh man, look at all this time where there's nothing on screen. If one of my editors sent this in, I'd be like, excuse me, editor. Why is there nothing on screen for 10 seconds? And they'd be like, oh, sorry, we'll put something on there. It's like, yeah, that's what I thought.
Charity, Harpy's Feather Duster, Monster Reborn,
Mucho dinero.
Raigeki,
Yeah, exactly.
United
It's enough
We
to
Stand,
fund the project.
Imperial Order, and Mirror Force were all banned as well, bringing the early era of the game to a close.
Oh yeah, they created the ban list because of Chaos Emperor Dragon. Before then, they didn't ban any cards.
And into the GX era, where the impact of specific releases wouldn't reach the same heights as Invasion of Chaos. That was until early 2008, when the next meta-breaking threat would rear its head and make itself known.
What's
to
the next
wider
meta-breaking
player base.
threat? Is it Dark-Armed Dragon?
Throughout the early to mid-GX era, powerful releases were few and far between. In early 2008, the landscape had just been shifted with the introduction of Light and Darkness Dragon, leading to the popularity of Monarch-related strategies, although decks like Perfect Circle, Gadgets, and a weaker form of Gladiator Beasts were all playable at this point. However, a new set was on the horizon, focused on bringing powerful new support to any deck that specializes.
Are we just a reaction? I had no idea. I had no intention of actually watching this video. This is kind of, it just kind of happened. I legit was hoping in your seat to see how stream was going. Was not expecting to hear my voice. Oh my god, it's the guy who made the video.
Phantom Darkness was released in February of 2008.
Is that the one that has Dark-Armed Dragon in it?
Dark Attribute strategies.
Oh yeah, it does.
Supporting the idea of loading multiple Dark Attribute monsters into the graveyard to facilitate the summoning of big.
We've been mocking it endlessly. Shut the hell up. No, we haven't.
While many of these cards would become staples
dark
of competitive
counterparts.
play for a time after, none would be quite as omnipresent as Dark-Armed Dragon, a 2800 attack monster that can special summon itself if you have exactly 3 Darks engraved, then let you banish a Dark engraved to destroy a card on field, notably not once per turn. Dark-Armed Dragon, or DAD as it became
with priority too. Remember, it can at least destroy 1 card when it hits the board. There was nothing you can do about it. And this was back before there was the concept of going first and going second cards. They were just cards. So even though its effect is a going second effect nowadays, back then it was just an effect. It was a pretty darn good one too.
Only further boosted by cards like Dark Grepper, Armageddon Knight, and Allure of Darkness from the same set, Destiny Draw, Destiny Hero Malicious, and Elemental Hero Stratos from previous releases,
the background
and the Dark Emperor Structure
seamlessly.
Deck released soon after,
Well,
which gave access to cards like Caius the Shadow Monarch and DDR.
Dude, I've loved this set. This was when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Again in high school.
Stratos from previous releases, and the Dark Emperor...
physical Yu-Gi-Oh! I've never stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever. I obsessively played Yu-Gi-Oh! On the Game Boy games and the DS games until 2008, in which case I started playing regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Again. And then once I stopped playing regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, then I went to online simulators and obsessively played Yu-Gi-Oh! Until Master Duel came out, and I just kept doing it. I've literally never stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But like this is when I started playing it in physical card games again. It's like when the Structure Deck came out.
Structure Deck released soon after, which gave access to cards like Caius the Shadow Monarch and DDR.
I don't think I ever had a physical hero deck. Back when going first player could draw on the first turn, those were... Oh yeah, I remember that.
The deck would rapidly gain notoriety.
I remember I wanted a Dark-Armed Dragon so bad that I fell for like this eBay scam where it's like Dark-Armed Dragon $5, and I'm like, oh my god, I want that. So I bought it, and it was like how to pool Dark-Armed Dragon. So they gave me instructions on how I could pool the card. from the store. Like, you should take the decks, the cards, and put them in the freezer, and then if they bend, that means there's a hollow in it. And I'm just like, I got scammed. Oh, well, it was only $5. And then I bought like a Korean version of it because it was like $5. So I think I still have that Korean version Dark Arm Dragon. But I really wanted a Dark Arm Dragon. They were like so expensive.
Dark Arm Dragon decks would be...
Dark Arm Dragon was a common in the OCG. That's why it was so cheap to buy like a Korean version of it. And then they're like, oh my god, this card is so good. Let's release it as a freaking hard to get card in the TCG. Because freak them. Goyo Guardian!
The Duelist Genesis was released in September of 2008.
I bought this back.
And with it came multiple shakeups to the status quo of Yu-Gi-Oh! The most prominent of which being the introduction of Synchro monsters. Monsters who could be special summoned from the extra deck by sending a combination of tuners and non-tuners listed on the card from the...
I remember when I first read the Synchro rules, I was like, that sounds made up. And they're like, well, everything's made up. It's a card game. And I'm like, fair.
Field to the graveyard. The other major infrastructure change was the introduction of a brand new type to the game in Psychics.
Psychics!
This type acted almost like an archetype, being centered around a series of monsters that all had...
Psychic was the first time they added a new type to the game, and it was hella pushed. I loved it. Psychics are basically like, I remember, because like this is the first archetype they added to the game, the first new type, I still have like giddiness when I see a new Psychic type monster. Like when they released all the Virtual World cards and half of them were Psychic, I'm like, that's the new type. Or like when they release Punks as Psychic, I'm like, that's the new type. And now we have Worms. I thought Worms were stupid. I was like, they just don't want to give dragons more support, but they want to print more dragons. That's what I thought Worms were.
Which were both tuners, to access synchro summons or to be tributed for something like...
How do you feel about Illusion? I think Illusionist is fun. Illusionist reminds me of like the vibes I had when they released Psychic monsters. Also, Cyberse monsters, I just think of those as like Link monsters. If there's a main deck monster that's Cyberse, I just like don't believe it's a real card. It just doesn't feel real to me because it's just like Cyberse are Link monsters.
However, the card had another unforeseen consequence to it. Krebons was Dark Attribute. With the new Psychic core, Teledad was born. Short for Teleport Dark Arm Dragon.
Where's Krebons? I want to talk about Krebons. So Krebons right here has an effect where when this card is targeted for an attack, you can pay 800 life points to negate the attack. This effect is not once per turn, which means if you get Krebons on the field and your opponent gets out like 2 or 3 monsters and they have no removal, you can basically stall out a whole turn with Krebons, which meant you could then use it as tribute fodder on your next turn in order to go into like, a Synchro because it's a tuner, or into like a Monarch because I played lots of Monarch decks back then. So I loved Krebons. I couldn't afford Emergency Teleport because it was expensive, but I used to just use Krebons as just a staller and then as a way to go into Synchro monsters because it was like the only tuner I could play. So like its effect was actually pretty useful back then because removal was not very prevalent. Not every deck had removal. And extra deck monsters only were Synchros, and like Synchros were hard to go into. Synchros are still one of the hardest extra deck cards to go into. Like if the first summoning method they had was Lynx, I think the whole history of Yu-Gi-Oh would just be like so much different.
With the new Psychic core, Teledad was born. Short for Teleport Dark Arm Dragon.
I love
the
Teledad.
added emergency teleport could be leveraged with the other level 4 and 6 pieces of the deck to quickly synchro summon monsters like Goyo and Stardust, while also controlling how many darks were in the grave at any given point to drop Dark Arm Dragon on a moment's notice.
Yeah.
This gave the deck far more explosivity than before. The March 2009 ban list would be the action needed to quell the Tier 0 menace. Limiting Dad, Emergency Teleport, Plague Spreader Zombie, Rhoda, Card of Safe Return,
This card wasn't banned yet.
Chaos Sorcerer, and
Old
Mizuki,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
all of which were tied to a Teledad variant in some way, shape, or form. In addition to the semi-limiting of Destiny Hero Malicious.
Wait, there was one card that was going to pop up again. Do you guys remember Gore's the Emissary of Darkness? This is the reason why you attack with your lowest attack point monsters first. Because it has the effect where if there's a clear field and you attack, they can special summon it from the hand and then special summon a token with an attack and defense equal to the amount of damage you did. So if you hit with really high monsters first, that token would be too big for the rest of your monsters to beat over it. And this card was a menace. It was such a staple. Every deck played it. It was really good. It could swing you games. It was like Maxi back in the day where like everybody played it and it absolutely won you games on its own. Because it gave you such a huge monster and a huge token too. Basically what you would do is you just wait for the highest attack monster to attack and then you'd use the card and bring out a huge token and then you'd have so much advantage you could overwhelm your opponent. Nowadays, it's a going third card that just summons 2 bodies. That's not a big deal. A going third card with like no destruction, no negates, no like advantage other than just getting a token on the board. Like who cares? That doesn't do anything. And you have to have no cards on the field. Back then, there was no such thing as going first or going second cards. They were just like cards because the duels would last long enough. Like OT Kane was a deck style. Like if your deck had OTK, that was like a hard thing that your deck had to combo off in order to do. Nowadays, if your deck can't OTK in one turn, you're probably playing like, you know, a subpar control deck. Like even Eldritch can OTK. Even Labyrinth can OTK. Back then, OTK was like a combo deck. We don't call decks OTK decks anymore just because every deck could do it. But back then you had to play specifically for OTK. So Gore's being a going third card was perfectly fine. It was so good too. It's like the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Going third cards that no longer see play because that's not a thing that exists in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore. And also like they just didn't have negates back then. And removal cards like Black Rose Dragon just blows up the whole field on its summon. It destroys itself too. And it was so good it was limited to 1. And like that's a purely going second effect that requires a synchro summon. Nowadays nobody plays it. Because like there's just better going second cards that don't require a synchro summon.
While technically not a tier 0 format, I'd be remiss to not mention the Dragon Ruler format. Lord
Dragon
of the Tachyon
Rulers...
Galaxy was released in May of 2013, and with it came the release of Dragon Rulers, a series of dragon monsters that were meant to boost specific attribute strategies, but instead were just used together in their own deck.
To give an idea of how powerful they were, it was the only archetype in history to have every single one of its cards banned at one point. There hasn't been another archetype of cards where every single one of their cards has hit the forbidden list. Like there's only the baby dragons and then the big dragons, and both of them spent the time being banned. And there was only like 8 of them. There were some support cards, but like since the cards were supposed to be like, you know, generic, the support cards don't specifically mention them, and they're not very good. They were so ridiculously overpowered that it's hilarious that they were never tier 0. How is it? This is like, you know, the crux of Yu-Gi-Oh! And the fact that one of the strongest decks of all time technically was never tier 0.
While in any other format this deck would have easily become tier 0, the only reason it didn't was because of Spellbooks, who received Spellbook of Judgment in the same set as the Dragon Rulers.
Ooh, there it is.
Judgment was an extremely powerful card that let Spellbooks essentially go +4 for doing what...
Do you guys know why Obelisk saw play? So Dragon Rulers were very good at getting up to 4 monsters on the board every turn. You know, all 4 of the Dragon Rulers if they wanted. And because of this, most of the time, like their rank 7 options weren't very good. They basically had Draco Sack or Big Eye, which are both basically going second cards. So Obelisk was an indestructible towers that they had option to bring out because it was untargetable, and most effects back then targeted. So if they brought out Obelisk, it had 4,000 attack, couldn't be targeted, and you could easily get its tribute summon requirements out by just using like all the special summon materials you got from the Dragon Rulers. And then other Dragon Ruler players could not target it with their Big Eye to remove it. They couldn't target with Draco Sack to remove it. They couldn't target it with Blaster to destroy it. It was basically Towers of Dragon Ruler format. And the way they got over Obelisk was either through Torrential Tribute or through Lucky Straight. You guys know what Lucky Straight is? 3 level 7 monsters. It has 700 attack. You can detach 1 material from this card and roll a 6-sided die twice. And this card's attack becomes the larger roll times 700 until your opponent's next end phase. Then, if the total was exactly 7, apply one of these effects. So let's say you get to do this 3 times because it requires 3 materials. So if any of those was a 6, that's 6 times 700, and that gave you 4,200 attack points, which was 200 more than Obelisk and allowed you to beat over it by battle. So all you had to do was roll a 6, 1 out of 6 times, because you got to do it 6 times. Because each time you rolled it, you rolled 2 dice. And you got to do the effect 3 times because the effect's not once per turn. So you had 6 tries to hit a 6, and that's how you'd beat over Obelisk, was with Lucky Straight. And if you were lucky, you know, the results of both of those dice happened to be 7, then you got to apply one of its bonus effects, which would also get rid of Obelisk. Send all of the cards in the field to the graveyard. It's not once per turn. So you get to try 3 times and it comes out. This is why Lucky Straight saw competitive play. It wasn't out to Obelisk, which is hilarious.
Both decks would be heavily crippled on the September 2013 ban list.
The most competitive gamble card, behind 6 cents, which is also played in Dragon Rulers. Yeah, I talk about those in my failed cards and mechanics gamble videos.
Dragon Rulers would be the sole tier 1 deck of the format, but would never reach tier 0 due to the competition.
Snipe Hunter,
of the top.
yes, Snipe Hunter was also successful in Dragon Rulers. Basically, all the most successful gamble cards in the history of the game were used in Dragon Rulers.
The other mechanic at this point in dire need of a shakeup was Ritual, as it was essentially stuck in the past with the only innovation in recent years being Gishki. The big step forward coming, though, was going to do far more than just...
Yeah, as Law Yugioh says in chat, Bull Raider was used to out the Jin lock. People also would use DD Warrior Lady to out Obelisk. I forgot about that. Yeah, they'd use Bull Blader to out the Jin lock, which DD Warrior Lady also outed.
It was going to break the format.
Necroz! Did you not have crafting
The Secret
at the
Forces
time?
was released in February of 2015, and with it came the archetype of Necroz, a series of ritual monsters that each had effects to generate resources or protections from the hand by discarding themselves and...
Dude, I remember when Necroz came out, people were like, oh, that's how you solve the problems with rituals. Make them all hand traps. Oh, that's so easy. If you want to make rituals useful, just make it so that the rituals that are normally bricks in your hand are no longer bricks. And you fixed it. You fixed the archetype. It's kind of like, how come the Dragon Rulers never bricks in your hand even though they're all level 7? Well, because they're also hand traps. Like, that's basically how you fix bricks, is you turn them into hand traps.
The primary playmakers of the archetype included Bryonic, who could be discarded to search for any Necroz ritual monster, Colossalus, who could be discarded to search for any Necroz spell or trap.
I called this thing Colossus for the longest time. I was saying it wrong. Colossalus. I didn't figure that out until I was like recording for a video or something.
Unicorn, who could be discarded to recur any Necroz card in grave, and Trishula, who banished a card from the opponent's hand, field, and grave on summon. While their insane resource loop was unquestionably powerful.
One thing to note about Trishula is that it had to banish a card from your opponent's field, hand, and graveyard. So if your opponent didn't have a card in the graveyard, you couldn't use its effect. If they didn't have a card on the field, you couldn't use the effect. So it was like worse than the original Trishula, which didn't require 3 cards to banish, because you could use it on your first turn in order to hand rip one of your opponent's cards. So Necroz Trishula was a little bit more balanced because it required 3. Even though the effect, the end effect was basically the same.
This all changed with Necroz, as the deck was able to consistently get out Laval Vol Chain using Unicorn as material to dump the releaser from deck, then use her to make a Necroz ritual like Colossalus or Trishula, providing a one-sided special summon lock on the opponent known in the community as the Jin lock. The ability to essentially lock your opponent out of the game was undeniably powerful, as a tier 0 meta would form around Necroz, seeing the deck take 22 of the 32 top spots at YCS Tacoma in 2015, and 24 of the 32 top spots at YCS Prague a month later. This lock became so prominent that many top players began to gentlemen out of Jin in the sideboard, meaning to play in an honor system where you would not play Jin in your deck for games 2 and 3. Obviously, this was not enforceable in any way, shape, or form, but the fact that players were legitimately considering it meant something really needed to be done about Jin, as it would be only the first tier 0 meta of the Arc 5 era, and the next one was about to swing into action.
It's about to
Thank you all for watching to the end of the video. I understand that I don't normally do part 2s for these kind of analysis, but this particular script was over double the length of my usual scripts, so I had to split it up somewhere. Come back next time.
Fair. I do the same thing when my videos are over 30 minutes long. The video format is similar to yours. Good. I wish more people would... Actually, I think a lot of people do copy my video format, which is good, because I think my video format's good. Well, there is one thing they don't copy, though.
Play for it.
Is, how they show like the cards on screen?
The strategy.
They don't put text, and the reason they don't put text is because text is super duper time consuming.
You're in the end phase.
They also rarely put more than 2 or 3 cards on screen, because these kinds of effects right here is actually kind of time consuming to set up, and typing in the text manual, because you have to type in all the text manually.
The Teledad decks were so good and so commonly played that people were putting cards in their main decks.
I think adding the text in really adds to the video, and it's also so time consuming. If you want to cut the amount of time it takes to edit a video, what you do is remove all text. And voila, the video now takes a fifth of the amount of time to edit. Yeah, see, Lily, the text. To be fair, you and Swag Kage are my inspiration to start 2 years ago. Excellent. I love hearing that. The Law Yu-Gi-Oh! Honestly, I've been doing this long enough that I've seen lots of channels that like pop up who obviously like, you know, copy some of the styles I use. I'm just like, good. It works. I'm happy to see it. A video of nothing but text. Oh my god. Text is so annoying. When I have to edit videos on my own, I try not to use text. What was the last video I edited on my own? It has to be, I don't know. It was probably April Fool's video. Also, if you notice, if you watch the videos, the text is almost never a direct retelling of what's being said in the video. It like summarizes what's being said instead, which makes it even harder. I'm sure the editors would like it if I let them just copy paste the script, but they're not allowed to. Okay, anyways, I wasn't actually planning on watching that video specifically. It just like caught my interest. I wanted to do a tier list on the tier 0 decks.